Hello, Bishop William Joensen of the Diocese of Des Moines, coming to you from St. Ambrose Cathedral in these last days of summer as we transition to fall and the light begins to take on a certain burnished cast. I feel a little bit like I've been liberated from my time of self-isolation after coming in contact with one of our priests who tested positive for COVID-19. Thankfully, Father is doing well, has observed his own period of time before returning to active ministry. But it reminds us how precarious our lives are, and this is something that will touch us in very real ways as we look at the ultimate horizon of what God is calling us to, and in this life with the horizon of life eternal in Christ Jesus. We want to possess that sense of awe and wonderment, not succumbing to fear, anxiety, or discouragement along our own pilgrim path. Kermit Lynch is a wine importer. He reflects on the late René Loyot, who was near Vouvray, France. He was a man who lived well into his 90s, and as Kermit Lynch describes him, he was a man worth listening to. He speaks with the wisdom of his decades, but he always had a sense of wonderment and awe with everything he discussed, not just wine, but everything in the world. The real world is the most incredible thing one could possibly imagine. The real world is the most incredible thing that one could possibly imagine. We don't need digital technology to alter and astound us, but I think with that lens of faith, the real world takes on depths of meaning that we want to appreciate. The world then is miraculous and profound. And for Loyot, he had that flash of once in a while of pure amazement, just like when a baby discovers a rattle and rattles it till his heart's content. And so in that visage that is there, that vitality that carried him well into his 90s, we too want to be people who can possess that vividness of faith. There are those even who profess to be Christian who don't really believe that Jesus is God, let alone that he was raised from the dead. And St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, if there is no resurrection of the dead, then neither has Christ been raised. And our faith then is something empty. But Jesus has been raised from the dead. Even as we recognize with our friends, our countrymen who are going through the Pacific coast, those deadly fires that have not only consumed villages and homes, but also sent a cloud of smoke that is wafting across the United States. Or those in the southeast part of the United States, in Florida and Louisiana, and Alabama, who've experienced the effects of Hurricane Sally, their own homes submerged, docks and other livelihood crushed and submerged in the raft of water that has overcome them. And so we can begin to say, is this something apocalyptic? What are you doing, God? All with the culture of the pandemic also surrounding and swirling around us during these times. And yet, through the eyes of faith, we know that our lives are in God's hand, that death is not the last word. So we don't become morbid, we don't become detached, but given that horizon, then we can reinsert ourselves with that same awe and wonderment and commitment to reality that René Loyot possessed. Some of our brother priests also, who were touched by positive tests in that indirect way, reminded us that it's a very tenuous balance right now, and that any moment we might have to withdraw from active relating to others, even those in our own households, for the sake of their well-being and protection. We think also of the ways in which people are trying to scratch out existence now and could benefit from our own hands, our own acts of charity. I was stopped at the Casey's in Bondurant not long ago just to get a beverage, chocolate milk, as I was finishing my long cycling ride. The woman said, did you want to bump it up to the next dollar so that it could go the change to the food pantry? I said, yeah, that would be a great idea. I said, then she looked at me, she said, I, though I'm working, depend on that food pantry to help me have enough to sustain myself and my family. And so I think our faith, not in vain, but our faith ever more vigorous, even though we have a sense that all reality has been transformed with a kind of evolutionary leap, as Pope Emeritus Benedict describes, a new realm of existence in space that's been opened up for us, an indestructible life, but also a call to deeper communion in these trying times. It is not apocalyptic, but an opportunity opportunity and an invitation that God offers to each of us. And as God has offered me the invitation over this past year to be your shepherd in my first year as the Bishop of Des Moines, I continue to be grateful for the collaboration, the interaction, and even yet the call and challenge to conversion, the call to be ever more true, and yet to be filled with a sense of mystery and awe. As I will maybe commemorate my first anniversary on the Feast of St. Vincent de Paul, the date I was ordained, I'm mindful of the window here in St. Ambrose, not far to my side here, commemorating St. Vincent de Paul. And so in honor of that, I would like to extend some of my own charity to the Carlisle, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, and St. Vincent de Paul Conference, who have their annual Friends of the Poor Run and Walk that culminates on the Feast of St. Vincent de Paul. And so I'm going to go for 2 good long rides, at least 50 miles each. And if you would like to support the local charitable causes that St. Vincent de Paul Conference in Carlisle does, I will designate any pledges or proceeds that you'd like to channel through me. If you'd like to send that to Bishop William Joensen at 601 Grand Avenue, Des Moines, 50309, and just put on the envelope or on the check, St. Vincent de Paul Cycling, and we'll make sure it gets where it is. But please know my prayers for you. Please know that as we are together, our faith is not in vain, because Christ has been raised from the dead, and our lives will never be the same. Thank you for listening. Let's continue to pray for each other.